Everyone makes a big deal about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but let's take a moment to appreciate another fictional universe with a ton of content. Yes, I'm talking about the world of the Fast and the Furious. And since F9 is coming out, it seems like a great time for a refresher course on the timeline. There's been a lot of action and adventure in the franchise, so I don't blame you if you struggle to keep all of those car chases straight. Let's take a look at the timeline and how all of your favorite films fit in. The franchise kicks off with the classic The Fast and the Furious and introduces us to our main cast of characters. There's Dom Toretto, played by Vin Diesel, who's a professional street racer and leader of a heist crew, and his girlfriend Letty Ortiz, played by Michelle Rodriguez. His sister is Mia Toretto, played by Jordana Brewster, and love interest of Brian O'Connor, an undercover cop who eventually befriends Dom and is played by the late Paul Walker. Vince, played by Matt Schultz, also has feelings for Mia and is a childhood friend of Dom's. There are more characters in the franchise, of course, but let's start out with this crew. In this movie, Brian is tasked with going undercover and infiltrating a game of thieves. These guys have been stealing millions of dollars worth of merch from big rig truck drivers in LA, and he is going to shut them down. He makes contact with Dom and eventually finds himself genuinely charmed and won over by his charisma. He's not just good at driving cars, he also has top-notch people skills. This makes it a little awkward due to his aforementioned crush on Mia and the fact that Dom's best buddy Vince feels the same way. While Brian is impressed by the tuna sandwiches at Toretto's Market, Dom is impressed by his driving. Other than the fact that Brian is secretly a double agent, the two have a beautiful friendship. Eventually, Brian comes clean to Dom and they end up having one last quarter-mile race. Well, supposedly. Because Brian ends up letting Dom go instead of arresting him, so he can be free to race another day. Next up is the Turbo Charged Prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious. Wow, that's a long title for a short film. This prelude was meant to bridge the gap in time before The Fast and the Furious and Too Fast, Too Furious. It helps to explain how Brian went from being an undercover cop to being a fugitive street king in the relatively short amount of time between these two movies. It introduces a new character simply called Girl, played by Minka Kelly, who unfortunately never appears again. But she helps give Brian a ride despite the fact that he's a very well-known wanted man. Eventually, Brian finds himself in Miami, Florida, where the next feature-length film takes place. I'm not gonna say that Too Fast, Too Furious is the worst film in the franchise, but only because I believe in letting people have their own conclusions. But if you weren't the biggest fan, well, you're not alone. In case you tried to forget about it, let me just give you a quick recap during what went down. As you probably guessed, it kicks off with Brian in Miami having fully transformed from law enforcement officer to major player in the street racing scene. He's teamed up with Tej, played by Ludacris, to maximize his notoriety and earning potential. Things are going fine and dandy until he gets arrested by the Miami Police Department. Oh, and they bring him down by firing an electronic harpoon into his car. Don't you just hate when that happens? But luckily for Brian, his former colleague Agent BILKINS, played by Tom Berry, also returned for this sequel to The Fast and the Furious. He wants Brian to go back undercover, since it worked so well the last time, and take down a local criminal organization run by Carter Verone, played by Cole Hauser. The idea is that if Brian succeeds, his criminal record will be wiped clean, and everyone will just forget about the police department deploying an electronic harpoon. Brian takes all the lessons he learned from Dom in the first movie and puts together his own team with his BFF Roman, played by Tyrese Gibson, and fellow undercover agent Monica Fuentes, portrayed by Eva Mendes. Brian captures Verone and is able to drive away with his freedom and a huge pile of illegally acquired cash. It was a win-win for everybody, except the audience, who wanted to know where Dom was and why this movie was so much worse than the first one. Next up is another short film, Los Bandoleros. Even though it's not very long, it at least has Dom in it, which is more than I can say about the last movie. Basically, it helps fill in the gaps about what he's been up to since The Fast and the Furious, and acts as a prelude to the next full-length film, Fast and Furious. But we'll get to that one in a minute. This flick finds Dom and his partner Letty in the Dominican Republic working on a brand new heist with a shiny new crew consisting of Han Lu, played by Song Kang, Tigo Calderon as Leo Tigo, and Rico Santos, portrayed by Don Omar. The gang plans to steal oil to give to the poor, and Dom and Letty confirm their romantic interest in one another. Yeah, it's a short synopsis, but give me a break, it's a short movie. Fast and Furious may be a longer movie, but it has a shorter title compared to The Fast and the Furious. This movie follows through with a heist that was being planned during Los Bandoleros. You know, the Robin Hood-esque scheme to steal oil from the rich and give it to the least fortunate people of the Dominican Republic. Despite just rekindling their romance, Dom decides that being with him is too dangerous for Letty, so he does the noble thing and abandons her in the middle of the night to go commit crimes. Who said there's no more romance out there? Probably the most baffling part of Fast and Furious is that somehow Brian is now working for the FBI? Apparently, going rogue and committing crimes still doesn't disqualify you from a position there, which is pretty baffling. This time, Brian's trying to track down the criminal Braga, played by John ORTIZ. Mia tells Dom that Letty allegedly perished at the hands of one of Braga's men because she was working with Brian with the hopes of eliminating Braga and wiping Dom's criminal record clean. So Dom and Brian both end up going undercover with the intention of getting their hands on Braga. Brian wants to slap some cuffs on him and Dom wants to put him 6 feet under. So although they have slightly different endgames, they're able to work together to bring down Braga. The downside is that Dom got arrested and sentenced to 25 years. But his friends, including new gal Giselle, played by Gal Gadot, are able to get him out. Unlike some other films in the franchise, Fast 5 doesn't need any kind of prelude. It kicks off right where Fast and Furious left off, with Dom having escaped from a prison transport. Brian and Mia are looking for him in Rio de Janeiro, but they're also committing some crimes in the meantime. Brian decides to take a break from just stealing cars, and now he steals cars from trains. It's a new take on an old classic, but he ends up making a powerful enemy in Joaquin de Almeida's character HERNAN REYES. But instead of playing it safe, the gang decides to rip off REYES and get one major score. So the whole team gets together, including Roman, Tej, Giselle, Han, Tigo, and Santos. Their goal is to rip off REYES for $100 million and make a quick getaway before enjoying their lives on the run. But they don't just have to worry about REYES, but another character named Luke Hobbes, who you probably recognize as Dwayne Johnson. He's a diplomatic security service agent who doesn't take kindly to these kinds of crimes. And then there's Elsa Pataki's character Elena, who has beef with REYES over the loss of her husband. Dom and Hobbs start off on the wrong foot, but later work together after REYES wipes out Hobbs' entire team except for Elena. The heist is a success, and Hobbs does Dom the professional courtesy of a 24-hour head start before he continues trying to bring him in. Being a criminal is one career that's really hard to retire from, as our friends learn in the film Fast and Furious 6. Everyone's comfortable and happy with their millions until they're not. It turns out that Letty actually survived the events of Fast and Furious, but she came down with a serious case of amnesia. With her memories compromised, she ended up falling into a new group led by Luke Evans' character Owen Shaw. Hobbs is out to capture him, and since his old ally Elena is dating Dom, he's replaced her with Riley, played by Gina Carano. He decides that the best way to catch a criminal is with more criminals, so everyone decides to work together once again. Making the situation even more complicated, of course, is the Dom, Letty, Elena situation. Eventually, amidst a lot of car races and action, Dom convinces Letty that Shaw is just using her, and gets her back on his side. But it turns out that Riley was really working for Shaw the whole time, so that the double agent thing kind of evens out. Giselle sacrifices herself to save Han, and ultimately Shaw is brought down, which allows the criminals to receive yet another pardon, and everybody decides to go back to LA. There's a post-credit scene which reveals that a mysterious character portrayed by Jason Statham is on the lookout for Dom, but I'll talk about that more later. The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift was actually the third feature film in the franchise in terms of release date. But since we're looking at these movies chronologically, we're just now getting to it. After Han loses Giselle, he decides to check out the street racing scene in Tokyo to cheer himself up. Lucas Black plays the role of a high school student, Sean Boswell, who gets sent to Tokyo after getting caught street racing in the United States. Sean and Han become friends, and as you've probably guessed, it's only a matter of time before they take to the streets. They're hoping to beat DK, played by Brian T., but since he's the nephew of a Yakuza crime boss, that proves to be pretty difficult. At one point, Han appears to perish during an attack perpetuated by DK and the Yakuza, and Sean works through his feelings by challenging DK to a race, and whoever wins has to leave Tokyo forever. Obviously, Sean is the victor, and at the end, Dom shows up to challenge him. Sure, there are tons of car chases and explosions in the franchise, but at the end of the day, isn't it all really about family? After all, who else are you going to get into all of those car chases with? In Furious 7, Owen Shaw is revealed to have an older brother named Deckard, who is the mystery person we saw at the end of Fast and Furious 6. Dom takes a trip to Tokyo to pay his respects to Han, and look for Deckard, who's been keeping busy attacking Hobbs and Elena and trying to track down Dom and his crew. When Deckard and Dom finally meet, they're interrupted by mysterious government agent Mr. Nobody, played by Kurt Russell. He wants Dom to help him track down Deckard, and offers him the use of the ultimate hacking tool called God's Eye, with the caveat that he has to rescue its creator, RAMSEY, played by Nathalie Emmanuel. She is being held by Moses JAKANDE, portrayed by Djimon Hounsou, who wants to use the God's Eye for his own nefarious purposes. So Dom and his team save RAMSEY and defeat Deckard, who ends up in the custody of the CIA. While the movie had a mostly happy ending, it was affected by a real-world tragedy when actor Paul Walker perished in an accident. Because of this, the studio decided to have Brian retire in order to spend time with Mia and their son. The fate of the Furious has everyone get back to basics, and by basics I of course mean street racing. Dom encounters a cyber-terrorist named CIPHER, played by Charlize Theron, who manages to blackmail him into working for her. What does she have on him? Well, mainly possession of his ex Elena and their son that Dom didn't know about until now. Dom is willing to do anything to save them, even if it means turning on his team to get CIPHER what she wants. He's forced to battle his friends and Mr. Nobody, but that doesn't mean he isn't secretly working against her the entire time. But defying CIPHER isn't that easy, since she has the use of the God's Eye, and she takes Elena's life just to keep Dom in line. But ultimately, Dom is able to foil CIPHER's plans to steal nuclear weapons and save his son. He names the boy Brian after his best friend forever, which is a touching tribute. Yes, there are tons of movie in this franchise, but there's also a spin-off called Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw. And if you like spin-offs, you may be excited to know that there's a new one in the works. We don't know too much about it, other than the fact that Vin Diesel revealed it will be a female protagonist-driven spin-off. Actress Michelle Rodriguez once threatened to leave the franchise entirely if it didn't start showcasing more female characters, so it's possible that played into the studio's decision. But that's something I'm sure I'll be talking about in a couple of years when this list of films is even larger than it is now. Hobbs and Shaw, of course, has Dwayne Johnson reprising his role as Luke Hobbs. There's also the return of Deckard Shaw and the introduction of his sister, Hattie Shaw, played by Vanessa Kirby. Hattie and her team of agents try to get the super virus known as Snowflake away from the terrorists at Etion. The good news is that Hattie escapes alive and with the virus, but the bad news is that her whole team is destroyed and also the virus is inside of her. Luke and Deckard are forced to work together to track down the virus and thus Hattie. The three are labeled as traitors by the Etion-controlled media. The only way to destroy the virus is to either destroy Hattie, which is quickly deemed less than ideal, or steal an extraction device, which is the route they pursue. Although there are some bumps along the way, Hattie ends up safe and Snowflake free. But the mid and post-credit scenes reveal some interesting information, namely that there's a new virus floating around that's even worse than Snowflake. It's possible this will come into play during the next spin-off, or it could even be a plot point during the upcoming movie F9. F9 is set to hit theaters in May 2020, and promises to pick up where the Fate of the Furious left off. Of course, characters like Dom, Letty, Roman, and Tej will be back, as well as Mia, who isn't quite as retired as Brian. But surprisingly, Han is back because it turns out that he survived the events of the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. Oh, and it turns out that Dom and Mia have a brother named Jacob Toretto, portrayed by none other than John Cena. Instead of getting into street racing, Jacob decided to go for being an assassin, and now he's working with our old friend CIPHER. There are a few questions that will need to be answered, such as how is Han still alive? And how are they going to explain away Brian's absence? Is he babysitting the kids while Mia's off fighting crimes? I know I'm not the only one looking forward to finding out the answers to these questions, and seeing some more car chases, of course. What do you think about the fact that this action-packed movie franchise is still going? Are you excited for F9, or do you think the series should have ended already? Let us know what you think in the comments section below, and don't forget to click on that subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Bye for now.